Welcome to Passion to Poison, the podcast that explores life's transitions. I'm Russ Tanner, and I'm here with my co-host, Mac Wilson. Today on the podcast, we have the privilege of talking to Jonalyn Morris. Jonalyn is the co-founder and chief development officer at Obsesh, a sports marketplace that connects consumers and top athletes through personalized video messaging and live streaming online classes. Obsesh helps top sports talent monetize their skills and talents to build their personal brands. For more than 15 years, she led the go-to-market strategies, talent sponsorships, and PR for some of the most iconic brands, including Beats by Dre, DTS, and Sony. Jonalyn also led the global PR and marketing strategies for THQ Wireless, which launched the first mobile games for the NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA, and WWE. She lives in Hermosa Beach with her two sons. Despite her success, there have been struggles and transitions along the way, and we're anxious to hear about how she was able to navigate through those challenges in her life. Jonalyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Russ and Mac. I think the only thing that is not in my bio is 13 years ago when I made a big transition from leading a digital division at an agency to go out on my own as a consultant. Russ designed my logo for Jonalyn Morris PR. So
that's right.
I feel like I had to mention that. Had to mention that connection.
Yes, that was a long time ago. I forgot about that. Yeah, what was that? You said that was 15 years ago?
I mean, it's probably
more,
14 years ago now, though I don't remember what I did on Thursday, let alone 14 years ago, but.
That's funny. Yeah, we're so glad to have you here, and you've had so many accomplishments. We're just anxious to hear about the path you've taken. But why don't you take us back a little bit to the beginning and tell us about your upbringing? What was your family life like, siblings? Because I think that helps paint a picture of who you are and maybe why you went into this career field.
Sure, absolutely. I think when you grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, there's a lot of jokes that you just come out of the womb being a sports fan. So I was very lucky to grow up in an area where, a big part of your childhood was Red Sox games on and Patriots Super Bowl parties and, golf games on at the grandparents'. But I grew up in Lowell, which is about 30 minutes north of Boston. And Lowell has this incredible, gritty, multicultural feel to it that was a big mill town and had a wonderful upper middle class upbringing with parents that, were very involved in the city, very involved in our childhood, and really created this environment of experiences, fostering our talents and kind of setting the stage that anything you wanted to do, you could do. I don't think they realized that would mean the minute I graduated from college, turning around and moving to Los Angeles. So they might go back and rethink that strategy. But I was the oldest of three. I have a younger sister and a younger brother, and was, really lucky, I think, when I look back at whether it was playing sports or the arts that I loved. They were always such big supporters. I think when I also look back, probably like a lot of kids, there was this entrepreneurial side. And I often giggle because it was anything from, selling pot holders to neighbors or Girl Scout cookies, or, as I got older and wanted to babysit, Russ, you'll appreciate, I had a magazine that a girlfriend and I, Sarah McAdams, created. And I would say we published, which I think was just my dad's secretary, making photocopies and stapling it. But it was articles and ads and Spanish lessons and art designs. And so I think when you're a kid who is artistic and entrepreneurial, it's always really fun, right, as you get older, to look back and say, oh, it's probably not surprising that I'm an entrepreneur, now. Like there was always like a hustle. Like, how can I have some cash? And I don't know if it was just to go to the movies or what I spend all this money on. Um, but I do love looking back and feeling like those ideas were always fostered and supported. And again, like my dad going to secretary, I can't even, he probably like bought her a Dunkin' Donuts coffee just to make the copies for us. Who knows?
So how about your siblings? You have two younger siblings? Did they follow a similar path to you? Are they as entrepreneurial?
Yeah, we are very, very different. Although I giggle, growing up, I was an artist, and my sister now works professionally in the arts. So I do love to tease her, like, I probably influenced that along the way. And she was very lucky to work for the Johnsons, the family that ran Fidelity, managing their art collection. She's previously worked at museums and now works with private collectors. Um, in that space. And then interestingly, I grew up with a little brother who is learning disabled. And so he still lives with my mom now back in Massachusetts. And it's wild when you look back and sort of look at that experience of when you have a sibling who was different and he was always in special education. Maybe even just things like, gosh, why does homework always seem really difficult for Eddie? Or Eddie doesn't have the typical friends that you have or go to the typical school or school program. And now, as I've gotten older and he's an adult, he has a great job that he loves at a local grocery store. He is a big fan of the WWE. And, we used to joke, my dad would make the comment that, like, Eddie kind of lives a sweet life, right? Eddie has no bills. Eddie doesn't have this drive of like, oh, I'm not doing this in my life. And we're like, oh, that guy kind of has it figured out. And maybe Eddie is actually fine. But when you see that and his happiness with this incredibly simplistic life of that is what life is like when you just live and you just be, and there's no need for it to ever be more than what it is. He never needs more money. He never needs a different job. He never needs, people to do things differently. And now I think he loves having extended families like brothers-in-laws and nieces and nephews, and loves being almost like a mayor at the local grocery store where he does have definitely my late dad's sense of humor. And I think my favorite thing in my day is getting a text from a childhood friend of like, oh my God, I saw your brother at the grocery store and he still remembers me. So it's wonderful to see the joy he brings people and running into them at the store. And then for me, it's definitely not lost on me because my oldest son is autistic, and having that experience growing up and getting that diagnosis, probably about 10 years ago, I've had the experience to get with our son's dad and the two of us to navigate, okay, we are now going to have to become our child advocate and fight like heck for this kid and set the course for the life that we want him to have. And it's because I had that experience growing up with my own parents. And so I definitely see that I was very lucky in having a brother who, much more, severe needs than my son does, who's very high functioning. But it definitely helped navigate the mindset you need when you have a child who really just needs anything, right? Doesn't even have to be autism or a learning disability.
Well, I think there's a lot we can learn from, kids that are autistic or have other challenges. Like you said, their life is more simple, and they can't, on one hand, they can't really help that. But on the other hand, there's something to be said about not caring so much about things, like not getting caught up in the rat race and needing more money and more this and more that. And I don't know. I think we can learn from them in some way.
Absolutely.
So where did after, so you grew up, you moved to LA, and you know what was the next step for you career-wise or school-wise? I think you said you went to Emerson for a little while.
Sure. So I went to Emerson College in Boston, which is still to this day very big for radio, television, and film. And when I got there, I almost felt like I was in this environment of all of the creative valedictorians. Um, and I think what I also loved about Emerson, and listen, I hope it's this way 20 years later, that the bigger universities and college programs that I looked at, Syracuse being one of them, you always had to take a very specific amount of course criteria before you were even allowed to do anything creative. And I loved that Emerson, you could show up and on day one, act in a musical, be president of an organization, start a new organization, a- and start being super creative and involved to whatever level you wanted to from day one. And the network and the access to internships at that school was pretty amazing at that time, especially for being a smaller liberal arts college based in Boston. I was very lucky to be a part of a pretty first of its kind internship when I came out to LA my second semester senior year at Disney's feature film production office. And I was set up with a producer, a location manager, and we really would take a film after it got the green light and bring it to life. So it was literally how the first offices were set up, the start of casting when the director was brought on, the locations. And it was a really exciting time. I feel like I'm going to date myself, but um, there was Michael Bay's The Rock was a big movie. Ransom was another one. There was a basketball movie called The Sixth Man that were in pre-production. And it was so fun having that TV background from Emerson. So I could pull footage, do video editing projects, help with a lot of coordination. But, I joke my claim to fame at that internship was they were casting ape actors. So these are suit actors who is going to play the George character in George of the Jungle, or that whatever the main like ape character was in George of the Jungle. And so before they had brought on sort of the main talent, they were looking at these suit actors. And I remember being so proud to like go work with the director and run the video camera, clean up the room, make the like audition calls, bring the people back the next day. And this director wasn't liking who he saw, And finally a gentleman, became available. And I remember calling him back and literally being like, all right, guy, this is how it's going to work. This is the scene that they're doing. I'm going to get in the scene as Jane with you. We're going to edit it. Then we're going to record it. Then we're going to stop it. And it was sort of very not lost on me that I was like, I don't think anyone's communicating to these guys what the director wants. I don't think the director's realizing what he wants. And this gentleman came in, we nailed the scene together, and he went on to get cast in the movie. So I joke I was Jane before Jane was cast in George of the Jungle. And
Funny.
I think it just lit this creative fire in me that knowing I had just the skills from Emerson, the access to come back to LA immediately, and was really lucky to work for both Paramount and Warner Brothers in the media relations departments, because I figured out really quickly that advertising and marketing were these really fun divisions where when you were in production, you started to go a very specific track. Like maybe you were audio, you were the camera guy, you were going to be a producer, and that's what you did. And I loved that in the PR and the marketing, you could be involved in pre-production, post-production, development, when series were sold internationally. And I was very, very lucky to be at Paramount during the most magical time, which was the success of the TV show Frasier. And I think Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce and that team, there were a lot of guys from Cheer. There was a lot of Cheers alumni, men and women who came and were the heart of that show. And I just really sort of saw in this wonderful way that you could be in Hollywood and treat people wonderfully and just operate and execute at such a high level that also came with love and care for the people who were in your world. And I think the shows that went on to capture that magic, whether it was at Warner Brothers or Paramount, or Friends had a little bit of that, The Sopranos at the time, and ER was another big one that just had that magic of you knew it was something special, and people really gravitated and fostered that and cared for it. And I think that was a big reason I sort of fell in love in LA and stayed in LA. And then after a couple of years in the studio system, realized, okay, if I want to have a high level career, I need to probably go on an agency side and get a lot more experience doing, and whether it's working on shows or working with the studios further. And then was just very lucky at the time that digital and technology were just changing the game. And I was one of the few people on the agency side who were willing to raise their hand and say, I'll work on a mobile game or a Wheel of Fortune digital initiative. Like, sign me up. I love that show. I love game shows. And I think I joked I became the Mikey in the office who would work on any initiative that wasn't a typical TV show or DVD, because at the time, no one wanted to work on those things. Or maybe it was like a software product that was for, visual effects or something for driving the industry forward. And when I met CEOs and creators and asset management companies that were creating tools that were making Pixar as amazing as it is today, I was like, oh my God, so you can work in entertainment. You don't have to work with actors. This is much less stressful. These incredible CEOs and super smart people are doing what in the industry? Amazing. Sign me up. And I think I was also very lucky that anytime there was a sports initiative, that the office would just let me work on that too. And so maybe if it was like, hey, I'm getting a mobile game, or I don't know, someone signed like Michael Strahan from the Giants. And I was like, what? Yes, 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 all day. And so I think that was a big lesson to me when I was younger, that just this willingness to be open and have the confidence to do the projects or initiatives that no one wanted to do gave me access at a really young age, gave me visibility to very high profile brands, and to just be in places that, again, I felt like I'm a kid from Lowell, Massachusetts, either driving in a golf cart on a Paramount lot or walking into ESPN after getting out of an Escalade, with Michael Strahan, who was probably one of the and probably still is one of the classiest acts in sports.
So I've got to ask you, when you're going through these stages where you're moving from here to there, and Mac and I, we've talked to other people where they've been able to navigate these changes without too much maybe emotional and mental stress. How do you handle that? Because a lot of people going from, maybe they've got an internship somewhere, but getting to that next step is just overwhelming. Like, just the emotional baggage and just pressure. And it's almost like there's a wall. Like, I just can't go through that wall or whatever. Do you feel like you ever ran into those roadblocks, or are you just kind of naturally able to just flow into whatever it is that you want to do? Or how do you do that?
I think it is a combination of, for me, when I look at my career over the years, I definitely was someone who let the stress of the level that I was operating at impact me. And I think sometimes and there are these industries where it's almost treated as, if something goes wrong with this talent or with this event or whatever it is that you're working on, or if it doesn't work out, the world is going to end. And you truly, in that moment, you feel like that. And I remember going, and maybe it's even something as simple as going on a vacation and feeling like, am I allowed to even go on vacation and turn off work? Because what if something happened or was missed or didn't go off like I would want it to go off? The world is going to end. And then you go on vacation, you come back and you're like, oh God, everything was fine. And I think that a little bit comes with age. And I think that would be, for me, that one thing to sort of look back at my younger self, and I see the stress that people probably put on themselves or their coworkers or people who are working for them, that when you're under that stress, you're not operating at your best. You're not treating each other or treating others as you should. And I think that when you're in that stress, that's what makes it really difficult to see really great things in front of you or see the great work that you're doing or to realize, gosh, maybe I shouldn't have gone back to work with my second when they were 4 weeks old. Like, what could possibly go wrong? But in that moment, you think, this brand might die if I'm not there. And then you look back and you're like, oh my God, they were fine.
So you're
Just fine.
human. You went through the challenges that most people probably go through. You learned to cope with it, and you learned to put things into perspective then. Just kind of
Yeah. And I also think, when I look back, and something I wish I had done differently is there were definitely times when in that stress, I would choose work over maybe going on a girls' trip or a nephew's birthday or whatever it was, right? And then in that, looking back on it, you're like, everything would have been fine if you had stopped for a couple of hours or whatever it was. And so I think making sure that you're not missing out on those things, or maybe just having that self-awareness of stopping yourself when you go to say no and say, have I worked 10 days in a row? Is it okay if I take an afternoon off? I'm sure something will be fine. Or maybe I could get up earlier and get something done so that I could leave and go to XYZ, whatever it is. And so I think for me, I look back and those are things I try to incorporate now or be really conscious of now, especially being a mom where there are kids who need you, right? Or things that have a lot more impact than just, a girlfriend who's maybe mad at you for the night because you didn't come to her happy hour or whatever it was.
So as I'm hearing you describe your career moves, it sounds like you've got an attitude of I can do just about any role or anything. And I love that because that's something that I've tried to foster in myself. But where would you say that that attitude comes from? Is that just inherent in you, or do you remember, was there a teacher or family member that helped you foster that attitude?
Yeah, Mac, that is a great question. I think that fearlessness to go and at least try anything. I mean, first and foremost came from my parents who really, there was always that phrase of you can do anything you want to do. And really that was it. And that whatever you want to do, you will always be supported. So I think when you feel like you have something to fall back on, you have that confidence. And I think a lot of it is really being clear about what are things you love and are passionate about, and not feeling bad for wanting to do more stuff like that. And I think whether it was being in my really young days and seeing, gosh, hey, if I go to this event, I get to meet people. It's fun. I'm out of the office. Like, granted, hey, it's a lot of work, but I don't know, dinner was free and I don't make a lot of money. And this is like, felt like I was out in Hollywood. This is kind of cool. And you start to take these like mental notes on things that are awesome. And then you have to also remind yourself there's this other mental note of, gosh, I am so lucky to be doing this. And I think, maybe whether you're in New York or LA or Vegas or Miami or like these markets where you're just in these environments, or I'm in an industry where really fun and really cool things happened. But I often joked, especially when there was stress, I was like, maybe I should have listened to my mom. I also would have been really, really happy as an art elementary school teacher. And so I also had that awareness of, with that drive and wanting to go out and have these big experiences came the stress, but there was also like this, your own check with yourself of, I got myself here. I wanted this. Remember, girl, like you wanted to be here. You could have been a teacher, you could have been a stay-home mom, you could have been 75, whatever those other things are in the world that you could have been. But you chose to be here, and you chose to be here because you love it. And I think you have to remind yourself about those things, because I think when it gets really hard or you have big challenges or things aren't going the way you want them to, that those little reminders of like, all right, this is a hard day, but every other day I do really love, so I think that's really important to have that self-awareness.
You used a word a few minutes ago. You said you chose this path. And, I do some life coaching with people, and I like that you use that word choose instead of decide, because choosing something means that you still have an out. Like, you chose a path, you can choose another path. You're not stuck in that place that you went down, or that path that you went down. If you decide to do something, the second half of that word is to kill off, like, side. It's to kill. Like, if you make a decision, it's like, that's it. And a lot of people, I feel like, get stuck in the trap of thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to decide to go this way or that way, and not realize that you don't have to decide or cut off other possibilities. You can choose to go down a path, but you can also choose to go somewhere else later. You're not stuck. And I feel like that's kind of the fact that you would even use that word instead of I decided to go down a certain path. I think it's kind of interesting that just flowed out of your mouth, because I think that sounds like part of what you're able to do is you have that openness that, sure, I'm going to choose to go down here, but that doesn't mean I'm closing doors. I can choose to go somewhere else if that opportunity comes up.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And there's a story that I remember very vividly in, and sort of remind yourself you don't always choose correctly, right? Or you might not realize you have other options initially. And I remember when I went back to work after my first son was born, and I really struggled with coming back. And the things that like drove me before, like new business and wanting to grow division and having a big team around me, they just didn't serve me. Like, they just didn't feel like the things that like got me excited anymore. But I loved PR and marketing. I love helping companies. And I remember my mom saying to me, why couldn't you just work on one company? And so I was so quick to snap back and be like, Ma, no one in PR can just work on one company. And then, flash forward 3 months, I'm out on my own. I talked to the agency about transitioning to part-time to just work on one company, which segued to my consulting business, and Russ Tanner creating the Jonalyn Morris PR logo. And I so look back and I was like, thank God I heard someone who had advice for me and didn't lose that advice, that when, my heart was pulling at me and everything instinctually didn't feel right, I listened to this is a, hey kids, listen to your parents, obviously life lesson here. But I'm so glad, even though I didn't hear it when she first said it to me, that when I was ready, that advice still sat with me. And I think I didn't even have probably that awareness until after, and I was transitioned. And at the time, my husband Vince and I moved to New York and did this great, he was on sabbatical and I just worked on one company, and we went out in New York and did all this travel. And I was like, wow, okay, I guess I kind of like, my mother was right. Oh God, my mother. But that was like, however many years later. And so I think that's something that's really important, that, for individuals, is you can think you're not allowed to choose, and be patient, because I think when you're ready, you will eventually choose the path that's right for you. And it's okay. Like, we don't always get it on, on the first try. And I think that's a good thing. I think a lot of us need to come to that realization on our own.
So let's shift gears for a second because my wife and I right now are watching the series The Dropout about Elizabeth Holmes. It's on Hulu. Have you watched
Hmm.
that?
No, but I've seen some of the documentaries on her.
Yeah. So she's, if, I won't spoil it for anyone that doesn't know much about her, but it's just an unbelievable story. Um, Basically about how to not do things and how to really screw things up. But she's a woman in Silicon Valley, basically trying to fund, get, hundreds of millions of dollars to fund this blood testing company. And, she gets to a point where she feels like the only way she's going to get ahead is if she dresses like Steve Jobs. She even changes her voice to sound more masculine. I mean, it's just unbelievable what she does. And we're watching this TV series, and I knew we were going to be talking to you. And you're a woman that's in this world of raising money, starting a business, but you've successfully done this as opposed to Elizabeth Holmes that just kind of blew things up. But it does point out that it can be a challenge if you're a woman to be in that world. It is kind of a masculine dominated world, venture capital, all that stuff. So tell us a little bit about how you've been able to navigate that without having to resort to changing your voice and dressing like Steve Jobs.
Well, thank goodness I haven't had to do that, but I have certainly had to be open to mentors, my own business partner and, people in my personal world to feedback on how to be the best business person possible or company operator or company co-founder that I can be based on my background and my experience to help position my company for success. And it wasn't something where I was changing me inherently, but it took becoming really confident in soft skills that I had because I'm not the lead engineer. I'm not our CFO. I'm the face of our company to athletes and partners. And the passion I have for when I love something and believe in it, in the network that I've built, over 20 plus years in very similar industries, that it took me a while to get the confidence that those skills were just as valuable as an MIT engineering degree or Stanford MBA. And once I hit that stride and I became really open, and I remember reading once and probably in like a self-help book, is that a lot of times when you're taking feedback as criticism, um, that was really hard. And I think I needed to make that mental shift. And sometimes I'll be at events and someone will, sort of say, hey, I had, kind of this thought on what Jonalyn said. And I literally made a joke of what am I putting out in the universe about I want to be a student of being an amazing entrepreneur. Feedback comes in unexpected and unasked for all the time once you put that out there. But I think you do have to be very open to learning when you're going into a new industry. And the same would almost be if you had played one sport and it's like, hey, I was this absolutely incredible rugby player, so I'm going to go out and play football. And if you weren't open to being like, well, now you kind of have to tackle. I know you didn't before, or you hold the ball differently, you pass the ball differently. And I think if you weren't open, to listening to people who had come before you and did it really well, you would be doing yourself a disservice. And I think at some point, you do have to get past that, these stats that you read about all the time that only 2% of women are receiving a percentage of the venture capital that's invested in startup companies each year. And you just focus on operating the best company, having a really clear understanding of what are the marks that you have to hit to get an investor to invest in your company, and have the right story, have the right team, have the right marks you want to hit on in terms of growth or customers or revenue, and get really good at those things. Because sometimes it's less about you and more about this business that you're growing. And listen, you can be a man, a woman, an alien, an animal, whoever. I think there's such an emphasis on what are those amazing company stories that solve a need or fix a problem. And I think it's starting to become less about women. I really believe that. And I think you're going to see more, companies that are funded that have women. And it's just because they're great companies. And they just happen to have, maybe a female co-founder or founder.
That's great to hear.
Having 3 daughters myself and growing up with 3 sisters and no brothers. And so I've been around women my whole life, and sure, they can't, bench press 800 pounds, but they're just as capable in every other way as anyone else. So it's just kind of funny sometimes to think that people are treated differently for those reasons. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you feel like it's shifting in the industry.
I think so too. I think there's also just a shift in general that company founders can come from a lot of different walks of life. And I think, one thing I've been most excited to see, I was reading something today about Baron Davis and his bio of what he learned in just being his own agent in his career. And someone who, you could have just said, like, you're a basketball player, you can't be a company founder or an investor, or like, you do layups or whatever it is. And I love this idea that, you know, what a company founder or co-founder probably feels, and has experiences that were a lot different than 20 years ago, than 30 years ago. And there's such incredible athlete entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who come from very different backgrounds that are doing incredible things and, helping to change the world and pave the way for others, that just didn't all look like, Steve Jobs or other typical founders.
I'm really curious, mostly because of failures that I had as an entrepreneur, where I thought that I could go do something on my own and quickly realized I grew up in team sports and I really need to be in a team environment and atmosphere. Talk about that transition a little bit from working within an organization to founding, and now you're, um, you know, running, and you are the, um, just that transition, that move from, supporting a team to being the one that a lot of people look to for answers.
That is a great question. And interestingly for me, and where my career path had gone for so many years when I had my consulting business, it was just me. And so I was the senior person, the junior person, the brands, every person. And when I started my company, really for the first year of getting it off the ground, it was my business partner and I bootstrapping, doing a lot of the work, which is what I knew, right? Like, I was a hustler. I knew how to do work on my own. And then as we got funding and we grew, that's where the challenges for me came of like, okay, it's not now just me trying to get things done. There is a formality to it of what our goals are, how we want to accomplish those goals, how you manage those people. And I was very lucky with my company now, where my business partner has been an incredibly talented operator at very big organizations, from Home Depot to Best Buy and others. And in our company, as our CEO, does such an incredible job of setting the culture and setting the tone and kind of guiding those principles that help us as, an organization that has leaders help young people create goals within the company and actually build things. But I will say, probably the biggest challenge for people today, and especially over the past, 2 to 3 years, is building teams and culture in a remote environment. And I think, you know, I think what's fascinating is you could have led a team in an office for 20 years, and all of a sudden now we were all finding ourselves as leaders individually in our homes, right? And so I think that has been, probably one of the biggest workforce challenges that people have ever faced. And we say it at our company. It is super, super challenging. And thank goodness the world is starting to open up a bit more. And so there's a little bit more travel, or folks that are on the East Coast can get together at a WeWork space or do a happy hour, or see each other safely, and folks are vaccinated. But I think that sort of challenge of being a solo entrepreneur to now being in a team environment and then getting those like leadership chops back, and then COVID hits and you're trying to figure out how to do it. So I commend people who have built teams during COVID, because it is not easy at all.
So it's definitely not easy, but do you see it as a benefit at the same time? Assuming you can navigate through that, where do you see remote work? A good thing, bad thing overall? Again, assuming you can figure it out.
I mean, the absolute number one benefit is access to unbelievably talented individuals who you may not have hired if your goal was to create an office in a specific area with only people who are based in that specific area. And to see the incredibly talented team that we have based, where our product is being run out of Bend, Oregon. We have, our athlete development and social media and coaching being run out of the East Coast. We have some social media support happening out of Barcelona. And I think if we had gone under the lens of, hey, everyone has to move to one area and we can only be based in one place, that we might not have these amazing people who work for us today.
Yeah, that's a good point. Your talent pool is the whole world. So how do you navigate the work-life balance? You've got two kids, there's a lot going on, you're a mom. A lot of people struggle with that. Like how do you figure that out and make things work?
Yeah, I think that work-life balance I think there's a couple things. One, taking your years of experience to give yourself realistic deadlines. Try to the best of your ability to then stick to those deadlines. And sort of, if maybe going to the gym or coaching a child's team or whatever it is a priority for you, that you make that time for yourself and things that are important to you. And then sometimes it takes like maybe getting up at 6 a.m. to finish a project and send an email and then be at the gym by 7, right? Or whatever it is. But if you're someone who feels like, I think for me, I try at least one morning a week on a weekday to get out on a beach volleyball court at 7 o'clock, try to play from 7 to 9. And I giggle that my team, it's probably sometimes apparent that I still have my like baseball hat on. I'm sure I'm Sandy. It's probably coming through Zoom. I probably got somebody else Sandy on the call, but they will joke that the best ideas Like the best clarity on things always come when I've come off of a volleyball court. Because, and listen, whether it's endorphins or I'm just so happy. And I think when I am there or at a gym class, right? And I used to go to the gym from maybe from 5 to 7 or 6 to 7, that I always felt like it was this gift of time for me. And I do try to do it early in the morning because, and I've tried to maybe go to the gym at 12 noon and go from 12 to 1 or go back at 6 o'clock. And I feel like my brain doesn't shut off. But it's almost like you have to trick your brain before it's awake enough to know, okay, I don't need to think about what I haven't done yet or what the kids need to do or what they're going to have for, what someone's going to have for dinner. And remembering that you deserve to have that time for yourself. And then as your kids get older, listen, I think there's a lot of different stages at parenting where, they just have to be picked up at 5:30. And so if you have to stop at 5 o'clock to leave and to get them, and I think it also took sometimes being unapologetic and not hiding that, like, listen, it's been 3 weeks. Like, it's my turn to do carpool. Like, I have to do it at 5 o'clock today. And, and hey, if something's due and I know I need to do that, I'll get up early and make sure I meet that deadline. But I don't try to hide it or, I'll just put it on the schedule or say what it is. And I think so often you don't want people to know what you're doing. I remember once being on a partner call many, many years ago with a woman from General Motors who pulled over and was just like, here's what's happening in my day. The dog just threw up in the back or whatever it was. And I remember thinking, my God, she's just like telling us that. And I think sometimes as humans, you almost sometimes forget these human moments happen. And I think there was something about COVID shifting that all of a sudden you'd be like, person's bed. Did they make their bed? What's happening? Is there a dirty laundry on that spin bike behind them? Or my favorite was someone's like son came into a Zoom call and literally like tapped their parent and went like they needed food after school. Like, because clearly they have been told not to make a peep, like when their parent was on the phone. And there was just something very human about the world showing when you're not an executive or whatever level, right? That when you're not in an office, this other life exists or this other place that you live or people's families, or again, like recording once a podcast with or an interview with an executive. And like, I don't think his wife realized he was like on a recorded interview. It was like, I got the lunch just got here. Like the kids went bonkers. And he was like, I'm so sorry. And we were like, well, people have to eat. And they were wonderful, got like this podcast, they were able to stop it and restart it. And everyone just sort of laughed. I think that's just sort of the wonderful thing about the world, sort of changing or Zoom calls or all these things that it's sort of, it was that work-life balance is happening because no one's perfect and no one's, quite figured it out. And you saw that people were clearly just at the gym or on their Peloton or maybe still on their Peloton doing the call, right? You're like,
Yeah.
that person's smart.
It's definitely humanized everyone where you're like, okay, these are humans. We can't be corporate robots that, do all the corporate speak. Like you have to, you can't hide that you're human anymore when your home life is your work life. So
It's true.
cool.
It's so true.
Not to bring up another TV show, but I don't know if you guys have watched the show Severance. You heard about that or watched that?
I have not.
It's really good and really interesting. It's basically about a company that implants a chip into people's heads where when they go to work at this facility, their personal life disappears. They don't remember anything about their personal life and it's just work. But then when they leave the office, they forget everything that happened during the day at the office and they're only in their personal life. And so it's like taking what we were just talking about, or what you were talking about as far as, remote and humanizing. It's like the extreme of that, where it's There is nothing connecting the two worlds. And it's a great show. I wasn't planning on plugging it, but it's a really good show. Um, yeah, I've noticed that. Uh, I feel closer to a lot of people that I work with that I have to work with remotely. And I like seeing the dog run in the background and bark. And I mean, some people get embarrassed about it, but it happens to me also. Like, say, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we've lived in this culture where, like Mac was saying, everyone's kind of a robot or whatever. And we're not robots. I mean, we're people, and stuff happens all the time. And we're all experiencing the same kinds of things, but we hide it and we pretend like it doesn't happen, even though everyone knows it's happening. It's just kind of this charade that everyone puts on. But I don't know. I liked you bringing that up. That uh, there has been a humanizing. It's one of the silver linings, I think, of COVID is that there has been a humanization that's happened, and that's good. I think that's good. There's also been a lot of problems, so we'll see how all this shakes out as the years go by here. But I think that's good to pay attention to.
So I'm really curious and super jealous about a couple of the things that you've got on your LinkedIn profile, both the work that you're doing with Obsesh and the Stadia Ventures. Can you tell us a little bit about each one of those and why you seem like you're at a point in your life where you're not going to do something that you're not passionate about. I don't know if that's a fair statement, but uh, they seem like passion projects for you. Tell us a little bit about them um, and why you enjoy them.
Yes. Gosh, that's such a good question. For where I was in my career, and this probably started about 5 years ago, I was definitely in my PR consulting career feeling this pull that I had a lot of contacts. The companies that I would consult with seemed to always benefit from my contacts. And it was just because I was very generous, right? And whether that was connecting them with media, potential other partners. And I just saw that those efforts were contributing towards their success. And because I was set up as a consultant to have this incredible flexibility with 2 kids, I didn't always benefit financially. And that really started to get me thinking. And my kid's dad is an incredibly talented entrepreneur who had very early on success. And I remember 3 years ago attending the Women's Equality Lounge. There's an event held by a very talented woman, Shelley Zalis, who is on a platform to help get more female founders and more female executives in C-level positions. And I remember very specifically sitting at this event, and she asked the question of, if you are not an entrepreneur today, why aren't you? And I remember sitting there and being like, oh God, because I have been telling myself the narrative that my husband is the entrepreneur and I'm the consultant and the mom. And I was like, oh, I could probably start a company too if I tried. And that really, really hit me and resonated with me. And I thought, gosh, my kids actually are old enough. We're in a place financially that if I was truly ever going to give it a go, I've got to go now. And then at the same time, I really felt this pull to somehow get back into sports. Like sports was just my favorite. I didn't know if, gosh, do I go back and work for like the media team for the Patriots? Like, have I missed my calling? Should I have done my career differently to just work for a traditional sports team? And I was really excited, 3.5 years ago when there was this talk of the XFL coming back. I love football. I was a huge WWE fan as a kid. I was like, oh my God, this would be my dream job, running media relations for the team that they were getting off the ground in Los Angeles. And I remember applying, and no joke, Mac and Russ, within probably 2 minutes, I received an automatic response that I was not qualified, but thank you for applying. And I remember sitting back and saying to my kid's dad, I was like, wow. Like I worked with Aaron Rodgers and some of like LeBron, like best athletes in the world, helped take Beats by Dre to their first, investment by HTC, eventually acquisition by Apple. But I was like, what do I know? What do I know about building a brand
2 minute
for
response.
and I got an automated response, right? So clearly I did not hit on whatever marks they were like looking for in some incredible AI. And the irony is, the XFL folded, 25 minutes later or, maybe 7 months later. But it really sort of hit me of like, oh wow. If I want to work in sports, maybe I need to start my own company. And a dear friend who I knew from my Beats days, and we had gone on and worked on some different brands together, finally got to this point, sort of circling back at that CES of, hey, we have this idea of a lot of these athletes who we've worked with over the years at different brands when they weren't LeBron or Aaron Rodgers or, Lewis Hamilton from Formula One, maybe they were these incredible action sports athletes or just like the athletes that now had fan bases weren't your typical athletes, but these athletes were not usually making a ton of money. Their Red Bull sponsorship was maybe giving them $500 a month. They were only making money if they were getting on podiums. There were no teams and league salaries for a lot of niche sports athletes. And that's still the case today. And I think, we really sort of came down to what if we created a company where athletes could somehow go directly to fans, right? Like they're starting to create these incredible social media followers, YouTube and Instagram. The algorithms change so much that maybe you're making money one day, you're not making money the next. A lot of athletes are starting to wake up and say, why can't I own my own fan relationship? Because I don't know how long this league is going to last or this team. And, these 20-year plus careers in public relations and marketing. Gosh, what if they, went to helping our own company, right? Versus other people's companies and really help athletes. And that's really where the idea for Obsesh came up. And we started the company. We're on year 3 now. And over the past year, we knew, once we were ready to sort of get serious about bringing on investors and create a marketplace so that athletes like actually had a home where they could go to sell directly to fans, we applied for Stadia Ventures, which is a sports-focused VC. It's the top one based out of St. Louis, and they do an accelerator program. And so they make an investment in your company. You go into probably an 8-week program. So I was in my late 40s going back to school. It was like Rodney Dangerfield's movie, like back to school. And when we got into the program, I think I wept because it was just sort of this feeling that from this day forward, someone believed in us. They believed in the idea. They believed in female founders. They believed that athletes need help too. And I knew that investment in that program was going to change our lives. And for me, coming from a liberal arts college in Boston, I did not have an MBA. And so it was almost like an accelerated MBA, but getting to work on your company and have it be sports focused. And so I couldn't get up early enough. I couldn't be the first one, on a Zoom call about it. And my business partner, every time we went somewhere, they were like, we've already heard from Tracy, because Jonalyn and Tracy, like I've already emailed everybody in our, we just sort of made this commitment that if we were going to do it, we were all in. And from that program, we got our product out of beta. We launched our marketplace very soon after, and it allowed us, because now we had a lead to go on and raise $1 million. And they've really, really been so incredible to us and supportive and connected us with other partners and, are helping us build into the future. And so I think anyone who is an entrepreneur and just trying to figure out, like, I just need like that little break. I just need someone to believe, or I need that support that I cannot recommend highly enough. Accelerator programs. And a dear friend of mine from my public relations days, who's an entrepreneur in the esports space, I recommended Stadia to him. He's a part of the new cohort of companies that just kicked off this spring. And so um, it was wild doing it at the time, still running a company, having 2 kids. But I think I loved learning. And I don't think I realized, because I always was like, the sound of taking a class or going back to school or an SAT gave me hives, like literally. And I couldn't get up early enough, grab my coffee, get in my cozy chair, and read through lessons, do the work, do assignments, get prepped, look at what the day was, because I loved it so much, and I knew what a gift it was. It was not lost on me that they only take, 4 companies out of hundreds upon hundreds that apply. And I think when you're handed something like that, we just sort of knew that it had the potential to change everything if we were willing to put in the work. And I think, kind of like you guys, my business partner and I are athletes, and all right, give me what I'm supposed to do. What am I supposed to hit? How do I train? What's my coaching? What do I do? What's our goal? And I think we took that athlete mindset and put it into the accelerator program, and then getting the marketplace, live and active.
That's a great story. And yeah, so I didn't know about that Stadia venture. So they only take a few companies then.
They do. They only take 4
That's
in
crazy.
each cohort.
So where do you see things going with your company at this point?
For Obsesh, where I see us going is creating more products that really essentially let athletes become entrepreneurs and build businesses based on those skills. So a lot of those skills and what those products are going to look like are coaching based. And so it's a way for them to have clients who they coach outside of the local areas where they are. So one-on-one coaching, using video to coach or to give analysis. It's one-to-many experiences or being able to coach in person. And then, and listen, there's no shortage of, hey, there's an app out there that maybe lets you coach or do something similar. And I think where we win all day is the approach that we take and working with athletes and giving them access to our learnings when it comes to the marketing and the public relations, so that these athletes have the training to be, charismatic, successful coaches. They have the tools to promote their businesses and promote the coaching products that they are selling, and, a team behind them when you're a women's pro soccer player or a WNBA star, to come in and really give you the skills and the tools to build your own brand. Because I think that's what we're hearing a lot of is, I just came from my career playing basketball for Alabama. Now I'm in the WNBA, and like, it's great. There's someone, for the team who does social media, but people aren't essentially teaching the athletes how to use social media to build their brand, or teach them to even discover, like, what is your personal brand, right? Like, how do I even do that? So I think for us, cracking, giving athletes a really modern platform to monetize their skills through all different ways, to coach, to mentor, to help the next generation of athletes get better. And then at the same time, become their own entrepreneur, have those skills, as well as building their own brand. I really think we're going to win all day. And for us, the real opportunity is, not only professional athletes, but NCAA athletes. And now that the name, image, and likeness ruling has passed, I think, Russ, when you were at BYU, you would have been, you know, in danger of losing your eligibility if you started a t-shirt company, based on your personal brand, or if you were making a ton of money, hosting camps every weekend. And so I think it's a really exciting time for young athletes to be able to take like the however many thousands of followers who are super passionate about them, or hometowns, or family and friends who want to support but have been so worried to do anything because no one wants to put an athlete in danger of their eligibility, that it is a whole new ball game. And so we're really lucky to have an NIL compliance partner and a company called Influencer. And so we are a really safe way for NCAA athletes who are already incredibly savvy about social media and have awesome personalities to help others and be able to make money when you don't have to be like going into a hostess shift at a restaurant. You can make that much money on a Saturday getting down to the local basketball court and, creating videos for your followers and helping them with, give tips on the sport you love and what you're already really good at.
Well, and especially for the smaller or the outside of basketball, baseball, football, for a lot of those, I don't want to say secondary sports, because those that are competing in them, they absolutely love it and they're very involved in them. But by the NCAA and the scholarships, the limit of scholarships, I mean, I worked every summer to pay for school so that I could go and not be able to earn any money in school unless I had a second job. And so it was 5 to 6 hours a day between weights, getting physical therapy and practice. And, it's almost a full-time job. And you're doing all that for the hopes of playing time. Obviously there's a camaraderie and everything, but I'm really curious to see how this will, impact and affect those that do choose to use that for, or use the NCAA experience as a way to monetize their, their athletics. So it'll be exciting, and I'm grateful for platforms like yours and others that are going to help athletes do that.
Yeah, I think so too. And especially where there are so many athletes who, and this comes in various different ways, who either have what we call like a super skill and maybe sometimes don't even realize it, right? Like you could be the best jump server in the NCAA, or the, number one libero or whatever it is. And realizing that you can build a brand based on that super skill, right? But no one's really telling you how, right? Or showing you how to do that. And then, and others want to be like you. And a lot of times there are fans that will approach a player after a game or shoot a note in a DM of like, hey, I just got on my first club team at Rockstar or wherever. And, how do I get the mechanics of a jump serve down before I go into auditions, right? Or, am I going to make this club, or whatever that question is. So I think for athletes, the ones that can kind of crack that will do really well. And then at the same time, for the platforms that will win out is the convenience for the athlete. I think what we loved about Obsesh and have been really proud is the technology, and that being on the platform, creating videos for fans, all of it can be done from your phone. And I think that opens up a whole new world of, you can be reading, what requests came in while you're on the bus, make yourself a to-do list, like, okay, cool, I need to, shoot this or take care of this stuff this weekend, and giving the flexibility on the pricing and the terms, and letting the athletes set the stage for what they feel comfortable with, the timeline that they know that they can deliver the coaching product, or set their schedule for when they're available to do one-on-one coaching. So I think that flexibility and letting the athletes work with our platform on their own terms was really, really important to us because it's almost like they need like athlete entrepreneur balance, right? Of like how do you do both?
It's a cool gap that you're filling in the industry. It kind of reminds me of how you go through high school and no one teaches you how banks work and credit cards work. It's so you come out of high school and you're like, well, if your parents didn't show you anything, you're kind of lost. And it feels like that a little bit. It's like here's these kids that, well, not kids at that point, but these athletes in college or even professional sports that they've dedicated all their time to this one area and they're amazing at that, but that they don't know how to do all these other things. And so I just think that's you're bridging a really important gap there that doesn't exist or didn't exist.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, we're about out of time here. This has been a really good conversation. You've taught us a lot. I mean, I've known you for a while, but I didn't know most of this about you. So you're a really fascinating person, and
Thank you.
yeah, there's so much that I think people are going to learn by listening to this podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, both Russ and Mac. I always appreciate a platform that talks about sort of business and the journey and the lessons learned along the way, especially when, you know, not everyone has been perfect. And so I think if there's just any sort of small takeaways that people get from these interviews, I know I often do from listening to other executives. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Passion to Poison. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review. Also tell your friends to subscribe as well.